Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred, and today we're not playing Raid Shadow Legends, we are watching Raid Shadow Legends. So the Call of the Arbiter animated series has entered its final chapter. We have episode 10 coming out this week in 3 days, 15 hours time. I've been waiting to watch these episodes. I don't know about you, but I tend to like to binge watch things. I don't want to just, watch an episode and then stop and then wait a week. I like to watch them all at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 episodes a day for the next few days and complete all of the episodes. So if you haven't watched the series yet, or if you have watched the series and you're just looking to have a conversation about the series, please join me. We're going to start with episode 1 with Gaelic today. And we're going to get my reaction. I haven't watched any of the videos yet. I have clicked on some of them because of the rewards. You can see there are rewards that you can get. But I haven't necessarily watched these episodes. So before we get started, I want to do a quick reminder. This is the animated series is about the lore of Raid Shadow Legends. Now, Raid Shadow Legends was originally kind of marketed as a fantasy RPG, and it hasn't really been very much of an RPG, right? It is a squad builder, a hero collector. It is fantasy themed, but there hasn't been much of a story. And there's really been limited lore in Raid Shadow Legends. So this is the first time we're diving into the lore. Now, in conjunction with this animated series, Raid has also started to create lore and write lore for the characters in the index here or in the champion page. You can go and click on champion lore and you can get champion lore from some of the champions. Obviously, there are more than 600 champions, I think, at this point. So not every champion will have lore yet. I don't know if they're going to cover every single champion, but they will be adding lore to more and more champions. So we get the lore chapters in the index and the champion rosters. We get the animated series, and this is fleshing out this world, which definitely has been asking for it, right? We've been asking for it as a community. This seems like such a cool world. Even if you go into the index, you have the Talarians, the Galen Pact, the Corrupted, the Nyresan Union. So you have these different factions. It looks like we're going to have 16 factions, and then we have 4 of these sort of alliances within this group of factions. So there's definitely some depth here, right? And we want to know about these characters. I mean, you can pick any character. You go into the Undead Hordes and you say, okay, I'm going to look at, Mausoleum Mage. Now, this guy looks cool. He's got something going on. What's his story? And it says, this champion's story is shrouded by the mists of time. When they clear, much will be revealed. So hopefully they'll get around to that. But you want to know, right? We want to know. So let's start with a review. When you go and play through the campaign originally on normal mode and you go through, each of these is a chapter. And at the beginning of each chapter, you get a cutscene. At the end of each chapter, you get a cutscene. So I think there are 24 cutscenes, something like that. And it's narrated. So if it's been a while since you've played through that, or if you didn't really pay attention to the story because it seemed kind of like just lip service and it wasn't all that significant, let me remind you a little bit about the story. So in the story, we have a war going on. And basically, there's corruption happening. The minds of the rulers of Teleria have been corrupted by Bad El-Kazar, who is right here. So Bad El-Kazar is the original bad guy, and he's corrupted the minds of several of the rulers of the goodly races of Teleria. Let's see if he has any champion lore here. So we do have champion lore. All right, so I'm going to read through this just before we get started. So the great city-state of Ireth has existed for nearly all recorded history, and for most of its existence, it has been known for its legendary mage academy. But that Ireth is long gone. In its place is a nightmare filled with monsters and madmen. The city's walls overflow with blood and violence, with the decay of corruption seeping into its very foundation. The blame for this transformation has been laid at the feet of the legendary Grandmaster of the Mage Academy, the powerful necromancer, Bad El-Kazar. Kazar was not always an evil soul, but he was always ambitious and highly skilled. Little is known of his early life, beyond that his name was once Valkanin, and that he eventually fell to the dark temptations of Siroth. Whether his fall was before or after he fled Ireth following a bloody incident in which dozens of mages and scholars were slain, few know. But when Kazar returned to the city, he was a changed man in mind and body. He swiftly took control, letting none stand in his way, even those he once counted as friends. Those victories were always political and peaceful, won with cunning. It seems he desired to keep his allegiance to Siroth to himself, though archived accounts tell of his skin growing more pallid, his veins darker, and his eyes more hollow with each passing month. A handful of more charitable scholars who have studied Irith's history dare suggest that Bad Al-Kazar's motives were not purely evil. They posit that they were, and may still be, partially rooted in desperation, in a desire to restore life to those slain in the disaster he fled the city after years earlier. Such claims have never been verified. Initially, Kazar's rule was, by most reports, highly successful. The numbers learning in the academy grew, the city's population rose, and each day new discoveries were made, until Kazar led a fateful expedition. Driven by visions supported by his research of archaic texts, Kazar orchestrated a grand voyage from Irith to the Winterlands in the far north. His goal was to find a site of ancient power, rumored to predate even the Grey Age. Kazar set sail with a fleet promising to return by the following winter. 6 years passed, and all were assumed lost. Irith's interim Grandmaster was fully inducted into the role, funerals were held, life moved on. And then Kazar's flagship appeared on the horizon alone. As the vessel drew close, the onlookers gasped. The crew were little more than bone and rotting flesh, undead. The most arresting sight of all was Bad Al-Kazar himself, standing at the prow, cloaked in tattered raiment, his flesh gray and dying. He had revealed himself as a necromancer. When Kazar disembarked his vessel, the crowd parted, and the new Grandmaster approached him with trepidation. Would Bad Al-Kazar choose to punish the hubris of those who had doubted his return? If he did, would any be able to stop him? But Kazar was magnanimous in his victory. He accepted the Grandmaster's apology, reassumed the mantle of Grandmaster himself, and presented the Mage Academy with the fruits of his expedition. The cargo hold of his ship was filled with bottle after bottle of a mysterious liquid. It resembled water, but even the least magically sensitive person could sense the power radiating from it. Kazar called it the water of life, and claimed it would change the world. None argued. It had certainly changed Irith. Kazar maintained strict control over the substance, portioning it out carefully to the most powerful mages in the city. They experimented with it, creating potions of incredible power. Consuming these granted the imbiber unbelievable abilities, and hugely amplified their strength. They called the process ascension, but it had a dark side. It exaggerated personality. The cautious became paranoid. The ambitious became obsessive. The agitated became furious. The proud became vain. Psychopathy ran rampant, and the mages' experiments took ever darker turns. More and more of the Academy's leading members undertook ascension, and so there were fewer and fewer voices speaking out against the escalation. Test subjects were seized in their beds. Monsters were left to wander the street. City guards were replaced with twisted mannequins, and the gates were barred to prevent the population from escaping. Madness gripped the city, and that grip has never loosened. None know precisely what became of those trapped within the city walls. Those few who escaped spoke of a nightmarish hellscape as the city twisted itself to serve the mad designs of ascended archmagi. Among it all was Bad Al-Kazar. Even as his city went mad around him, his subjects remained loyal. He was the undisputed Grandmaster of Irith. That was centuries ago. Since then, Bad Al-Kazar has been sighted beyond the city walls, wandering the back roads of Teleria. What his goals are, none know. So, Bad Al-Kazar now has some backstory. We know where he became the necromancer. Obviously, he is the bad guy of the campaign story. He corrupts the minds of the rulers of Teleria, who then go to war with each other. The Arbiter recruits our starter heroes as a company to fight against this evil, and they eventually free everybody from Bad Al-Kazar's influence, but not before sacrificing themselves. They actually end up fighting against demons at the very end, so they defeat Bad Al-Kazar and then go on to fight the source of the evil. So he's not maybe the head bad guy, he's sort of the manipulator. But yeah, so that is the story of Bad Al-Kazar. Now on the flip side, we have Arbiter. So let's quickly just go over to Arbiter, who is in the High Elves faction. And let's read her lore, because she's obviously on the side of good in the same conflict. Of all the figures throughout the history of Teleria, none loom larger than the Arbiter. The wilder, older histories say that she was the most beloved of Lumaya, that she was the template on which the elves were created, and that she is and was a warrior of incomparable power and skill. Legends paint her as the immortal protector of all Teleria, fighting an endless war against Siroth down the centuries, a sentinel with an eternal vigil, and with endless vigilance to match. None of that is wrong, but the full truth is in short supply, and what little is known has been distorted by time, error, and cruel intention. And so when one speaks to the Arbiter, and so when one speaks of the Arbiter, one might speak of three different people: the Arbiter of the ancient tales, the Arbiter that the Sacred Order tries to forget, and the Arbiter of the world today. The Arbiter of long ago, spoken of in hidden texts and painted on crumbling ruins, was a warrior. That much could be held in certainty. She fought to protect Teleria. Even the most cautious scholars agree that the Arbiter was the ultimate leader of the Telerians during the First and Second Great Wars. So there were previous wars. Wars in which the existence of Teleria itself was threatened by Sirath's mighty hordes of undead and demon spawn. This Arbiter was a hero, and she called herself the Herald of Lumaya. Little else is known. Among the Knights of the Sacred Order, the Arbiter is not spoken of at all. She is not unknown to them precisely. She is a vacuum, a void, an empty hole in their faith and doctrines. She has been carefully cut out of the Order, her statues toppled, and her commands erased. The Arbiter of the Sacred Order is a mark of shame, or perhaps a mark of betrayal. Whose betrayal? Whose shame? That knowledge has been lost, or it has been destroyed outright. Today, precious few alive have met the Arbiter, or even recognized her. If the tales of her power and leadership were ever true, she has now long since faded. Gone is the Herald of Lumaya, commander of the armies of Teleria, destroyer of Sirath, and smiter of the demon-spawn legions. All that is left is visions of an elf-like woman wandering the roads of the kingdom that only exist because of what she has done. If one were to ask her who she is, she will say she is one of the firstborn, that she was witness to the horror of the Great Divorce, and that she is the last protector of Lumaya's true will. She will talk of how much the world seems to be slipping between her fingers. Where once entire nations raised their armies at her command, she now compels only beggars and saints, the truly desperate or the mad. Where once her gratitude was coveted by kings and emperors alike, now she is all but forgotten. Where once she was a symbol of order and stability, she is little more than myth, and useless wars cripple the only powers capable of defying the shadow that she sees seeping into the world with every passing day. But the Arbiter fights on, regardless of all this, for at least part of the myths is true indeed. She has an eternal vigil matched with endless vigilance. And while much of her power may be spent, and her presence in the physical world is something she can never maintain for long, she still has her shards. She still has her champion. Most of Teleria may have given up on the Arbiter, but she will never give up on Teleria. So that's interesting. That gives us a little bit of background into the shards. Apparently the shards are some power of the Arbiter. She creates the shards, or she uses the shards in some way. So the shards we use to summon champions come from the Arbiter. That's kind of cool. Okay, so we know the bad guy, bad El-Kazar. We know the good guy, Arbiter. Obviously, we have the starter champions. I don't want to look at the starter champion lore just yet. I want to go ahead and start this episode on Gaelic. And a quick note before we even start. By the way, this series, as this game is art. It's art meant to be consumed and enjoyed by its customers, its viewers, its participants, whatever you want to call them. And as art is a personal experience, I believe that it is open to interpretation. And that goes right down to the naming conventions. So for instance, if Bad El-Kazar's name is actually El-Kazar, I don't know, that's fine. If Gaelic is Gallic, is, Galek, whatever it happens to be, that's fine. Don't let that interfere with your personal enjoyment of the art, whether it's the game or whether it's the Call of the Arbiter animated series. If this series pronounces a name differently than you've pronounced it in your head, and that bothers you, just keep pronouncing it the way you want to pronounce it. You don't have to change, okay? You don't have to change. This is just somebody's interpretation of this particular story, of this particular champion, of this particular champion's name, okay? So if you want to change your pronunciation to match the pronunciation of the animated series, great. If you don't, that's also great. I am probably not going to change my pronunciations. I've been calling this champion Gaelic for the last 2 years, 3 years. I will continue to call him Gaelic even if it's Galek. So I wanted to say that outright right at the beginning. By the way, this is different than in real life, okay? And this is an important distinction. If somebody has a name, a person has a name that is pronounced differently than you expected, if her name is Anna, not Anna, even though it spells the same way, and you think, oh, I know other people who would pronounce it Anna because I've met people who spell it that way and pronounce it Anna, and you say Anna. Give each person the right and the dignity of their own identity. right? This is a real person with a real identity who has a real name that means something to that person. That's different than art. Art is experienced by you, but somebody's name is theirs and it belongs to them. So I just wanted to make that distinction. I'm not advocating for people to just call everybody whatever they feel like it. I just want to say that when it comes to art, art is for you. And if you consume it in such a way that your interpretation is different than somebody else's, you have a right to your interpretation, and that should stand. Okay. Anyway, sorry, enough preamble. Let's actually get into the episode. I'm so excited to watch this episode. It's been a long time I've been waiting for this, but I wanted to be able to watch them all at once. The episodes are short as I understand them. They're only about 10 minutes, 10 minutes, something like that. So I'm going to just click on the first one here. I will leave the closed captioning on the bottom. I just like to watch with those. That way I don't have to hear everything perfectly and rewind it. I can just read and watch at the same time. Hope that doesn't distract anybody. So let's get started.
Darkness rises, and so must light.
Oh. Sorry about that.
Gallic, will you answer the call?
So she did. She said Gallic, I think.
Orcs on the horizon! Get the women and children to safety!
Artak, that's our new champion, our new free login champion.
This is not who you are. Make your choice.
So that's the Arbiter, apparently.
Gallic, this is justice. These...
All right. So we already have some information, right? We already can tell that he is conflicted by the events that are occurring. The orcs are waging war on some kind of human or elvish settlement. I can't quite tell. I'm assuming human just from the style. And he seems conflicted by it. You know, there's the death of a child there. He picked up the unicorn toy. And then the Arbiter appeared to him in that moment of internal conflict and said, you know, this is not who you are. Make a choice. So obviously she's recruiting him to a greater purpose, and we'll see what happens. By the way, I think we see a character here. This guy looks like a champion from the game. So I'm going to kind of watch out for that, see if we'll see champions from the game. I forget who this guy is. I think he's a rare champion in the orc faction, and we'll take a look at that later. But we might see some more of them.
Gallic, this is justice. These lands used to belong to the clans. We are reclaiming what is rightfully ours.
As you say, Father.
Whatever it takes. Bring the prisoners!
Please! We're just farmers!
This man led the human oppressors. He is responsible for the deaths of hundreds of orcs, as are his ancestors. For millions, he must be punished. This human too bears responsibility. And must stand in judgment.
Yeah.
Son, what are you doing?
Okay, so Yeah, there he is again. That same character. And I think this is another orc character in the background, the female there. All right, so I have a little bit of an issue with this. I know that these are short episodes and they're trying to tell a lot of a story in a short period of time, but they're really relying on a lot of fantasy themes, information that we would take just by being fans of the genre and knowing from other stories, right? So here we've clearly got sort of a cultural war, a race war between orcs and humans. That's really common. It's from Lord of the Rings. It's from World of Warcraft. There's, I mean, orcs and humans are always in opposition, right? So Artak's, argument is the same as every sort of blood feud argument, which is that they killed a bunch of us, so we're going to kill a bunch of them, and it'll never end, right? That's basically the idea. So whoever's stronger at the particular moment takes out their, feelings of inadequacy or, of persecution on the other group that was in power that now they have power over, and it'll go back and forth for ages. So clearly, we see that in the real world as well. That's not an uncommon idea. But then we have this idea here also in the fantasy genre of, a member of an evil race who has a conscience. Maybe it's not an evil race. Maybe these are just, particularly aggressive orcs or bad orcs, and there are other orcs who are like good orcs. I don't know. But I struggle with the idea that over a case of conscience, a person is likely to save a complete stranger by murdering a friend or family member and betraying their parent, right? Like, that seems extreme. It seems more likely that, like, at night sometime when he's alone in his tent and he's like, I don't want to live this life, he runs away. That feels more likely. Obviously, this is more dramatic. It's something that we've seen before. Not terribly original, and a little bit disappointing that that's the way it played out. But like I said, I think they're trying to shoehorn a much larger story into a 6-minute video here. So take it as you.
Making a choice.
Please.
Babies are cute. Even animated baby.
All this for what? A single human child?
I do not wish to fight you, father.
You are no son of mine.
I wonder about this theme sometimes in fantasy and science fiction. It comes back like fathers and sons fighting against each other. The father is the cruel oppressor and the son breaks free, is more moral or ethical than his father. It's very Star Wars, right? Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader kind of thing. But I feel like it probably doesn't happen as often as we see stories about it. Like, we're more like our parents than we like to admit sometimes. And usually good people come from good parents, not the other way around, right? Good people don't come from really evil parents. That's not typical. So, another pretty common theme. But let's see what happens. Nice shot. Uh-oh.
Let go, father. It is over.
He's pretty determined.
Not for me. Weak.
Oh! Ouch. Not so weak now, old man. Oh, wait. Look. The arm is floating. His arm is floating next to him in the water. Oof. Bad call. Smiling baby. All right, I just want to say here, let's just go back a second. This is something that, so there's something called, I think it's called the uncanny valley, right? And it was originally a term brought up in robotics, but it applies to animation too. And I've read a couple of articles on this. So, don't crucify me if I get names wrong and things wrong about this, but this is the idea. This is the general idea, is that in robotics and animation, anything that simulates human life, we accept, like our brains accept the simulation up to a certain amount of similarity. And once it gets too similar, what happens is any differences between reality and the simulation become like hyper exaggerated. So we actually like things that are more stylized, even if they mimic life. So for instance, I'll give you an example. This animation, like style is similar to the style of animation from the Clone Wars animated series, the Star Wars Clone Wars animated series. And if you've ever watched that series, it's actually more stylized than this is. Like the angular planes of the face, the geometry of the bodies is more straight lines and less curved. And as a result, even though it looks obviously like they're humans and aliens and whatever the characters are, and you can tell what's happening and you accept psychologically that the story is being told about people, your brain recognizes that it's a story, that it's not real people, that these events aren't actually happening. In this situation, I think it's a little bit more realistic than the Clone Wars series. So this actually looks closer to real life than that series does. And it's bordering on this place where we almost don't like it, where it's almost too close to reality, where the differences start feeling very wrong. It'd be like seeing somebody walking through the supermarket who looks like this. You'd be like, there's something wrong with that guy. He doesn't look quite right, And that's what's happening a little bit. It's not so exaggerated. If they were a little bit closer to reality, I think it would be that, I would have that experience. But I think I would prefer, or maybe other people would prefer, if it were a little bit more stylized than it is. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you're getting that effect, the uncanny valley effect. You can go ahead and Google it. It's a real thing. I didn't make it up. But see if you're having that experience where you don't like the animation, not because it's bad animation. It's very good animation, but because the animation is almost too accurate. Like even the creases in his lips and the furrows in his brow, the individual hairs move. Okay, so different city. I don't know who this is. All right, so I'm curious. I'm wondering if, like I said, he betrayed his whole clan and his way of life to save one child. So the child seems like it might be important. I don't even know if it's a boy or a girl, but the child might turn into a champion somewhere in the roster. Like it might be a champion here. And this obviously looks a little bit like the Sacred Order. So this could be a Sacred Order champ. I don't know. I don't recognize this champion here in the middle of the screen. The older woman who's picking up the child. I don't know who that is. I'm wondering if that is also a champion, or maybe it's just a generic character in the Sacred Order. So maybe we'll find out more about that. Okay, and that's it. That's the end of that episode. Okay, so very interesting episode. I'm not sure how I feel about it just yet. I definitely feel like there's some downside, right? The story's a little bit too generic. I've definitely seen it before. It's not real original. It's hard to be original in this space, though, so I'm worried more about it being effective than being original. And so far, 5 out of 10, right? It's pretty average. It's pretty average. Animation looks cool. Wish the episodes were longer. They could get more story in there. But definitely, I'm excited to hear and see more about the backstory and the lore of Raid Shadow Legends. So before we leave, I do want to check on the lore of Gallic, because I do feel like, now that we've seen his episode, we can go and look and see what they say in the champion lore. I know they called him Gallic. I'm going to continue to say Gallic. I hope that doesn't bother anybody. Okay. Gallic was raised in a world of violence. His father, Artak, espoused a campaign of revenkism. I think it's basically a war of reconquest, or of reacquiring what's been lost, something like that. A campaign of revenkism against the Bannerlords of Kael. His mission was to reclaim, there you go, with blood and war, all the lands the humans had stolen from the orcs during the Red Crusade, many centuries in the past. Artak's quest dominated every aspect of the clan's life, and the young were praised only for their aggression and prowess in battle. Okay, so it says clan. So the orc clans, I'm assuming it's kind of almost like barbarian clans, like there are multiple ones, but his clan is trying to reverse the Red Crusade, which we don't get anything more about other than the name. Gallic grew up as a quiet and introspective youth, and many mistook his silence for shyness. He rarely partook in revelry or raucous celebration, instead favoring books at home or listening to the tales of the clan's Cantadella, a songkeeper tasked with remembering the histories of the orcs and the Galen Pack. On this steady diet of knowledge and history, Gallic had difficulty navigating the politics of his clan. His mother, Arax, only made it harder. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. And I'm having a little bit of difficulty. Obviously, in the lore, in the story, Gallic is one kind of character. But the first time we were introduced to Gallic was in the commercials for Raid Shadow Legends, right? And in that, he's like a partier. He's the big man on campus. All the women love him, and he's good at everything. And he's like the quarterback of the football team. And I mean, we do also see him he's in therapy, like he's going to see a psychologist, and he's talking about how sometimes he wants to heal, but his axes are always on fire and he has to attack things. So, obviously there he's funny, he's over the top, he's got a big personality, and here he's quiet and introspective and shy. So I have to separate those two things in my mind. Obviously, the Gallic from the commercials is not the Gallic from the story. So those are different things. And that makes sense. The commercials are there to get you interested in the game. The story is actually there to tell the purpose behind these characters, where they came from, and fill in all that, more, I don't want to say realistic because it's still a fantasy, but it's like the real story of these characters. So it's almost like actors and the roles they play, right? Like the actor Gallic is the big shot in the commercials, and then the Gallic from the stories is the character he plays, and this is the champion, or vice versa, however you like. All right, Arax. Arax was the Cantadella of an orc clan from the northern realm of Frostheim. The humans of that mountainous kingdom had far friendlier relations with the orc clans living on their land. The revenkism that had so poisoned Artak and his allies could find no grip in the orcs of Frostheim, nor in Arax. She had married Artak to cement an alliance, though there were whispers she had been sent to try to temper Artak's rage. She did not succeed with her husband, but her son proved more pliable. From her, Gallic learned the value of life, patience, and perspective, and he sought to avoid partaking in war. Gallic's peers found his values repulsive. As firstborn of the clan's warlord, skill in battle was expected of him, and they punished him for any lapses. Fortunately, Gallic bore incredible strength in his blood, and learned quickly from the brutal attacks of his friend. It did not take long for Gallic to grow into the finest warrior in the clan, second only to his father. Then Gallic's mother passed on, and there was no one left to protect him from the cycle of war he had tried to avoid all his life. Artak was quick to draw Gallic onto the battlefield, but with every step, Gallic felt his true self slipping away. Fortunately for him, there were higher powers at play, and dreams of a golden woman with hair as red as his own changed his life forever. Okay, so again, sort of a common story. the conscience, right? The outcast, the black sheep who feels like, life should be better, the world should be better, he should be better, his people should be better. And so he throws it all away to pursue sort of this vision of what the world could be. Interesting. Definitely a story we've heard before, can be done well. I find it interesting that he is a member of a faction and he plays within that faction in the game, but in the first episode, he kind of throws that faction away. We know in the beginning of the game, when you first load in, the 4 starter champions have been brought together to try to help the Arbiter in some way. And there's some dialogue between them that indicates maybe they're not doing it all voluntarily. So that's kind of interesting. But this seems to indicate that it is, in fact, a voluntary. It's a choice. He's choosing to go with the Arbiter. Okay, so last character from... oh, by the way, I do think we saw... Yeah, I'm pretty sure the character we saw was Twin Claw. And then the female character that we saw a lot of, I think, was kind of like... maybe like Sun Tribe with the black horns here. We saw Sun Tribe, and we saw Twin Claw. I don't know if we saw anyone else. Maybe Veteran. Somebody like that who had no helmet on and seemed kind of in that way. Or maybe War Chanter. That might have been, maybe War Chanter, not Veteran. Okay. But then the other major character was Artak, who's obviously a great champion in the game. Let's see if we have any lore for Artak. Okay. Hundreds of years ago, the Galen Pact invaded the kingdom of Kaerok. It was defeated. After 7 years of war and pillage, the Galen Pact's forces were broken on the field of battle, and tens of thousands of orcs, ogren, lizardmen, and skinwalkers were scattered throughout the continent of Athel. But not all of those Galens were warriors. For many of the Galen Pact, the invasion of Kaerok was not simply retribution for the Red Crusade, but also a reclamation of what they believed to be their ancestral homeland. Anticipating a glorious victory and the purge of every human in Athel, dozens of Galen clans sailed to Kaerok in their entirety, families and children traveling alongside hosts of warriors. When the Galen forces were broken, these innocents were exposed to the wrath of the Bannerlords and others, and were forced to flee alongside their routing defender. None of the Galen Pact races suffered that fate as much as the orcs. Nearly every orc clan had sailed to Anhelt as part of the invasion, and each clan had to find its own way after the Pact's defeat. Some managed to negotiate with Bannerlords too weakened by the war to fight them, but most were forced to hide on barren lands or in choking forests. As centuries passed, these isolated clans set about doing what they did best, making do with what they could get. But once the Bannerlords recovered from the Galen War, they found even this meager peace intolerable. All right, so that Galen Pact, those 4 factions, Ogrins, Orcs, Skinwalkers, and Lizardmen, the reason they are an alliance is because of this war, it seems like. It was into this world, a world growing ever smaller as Bannerlord knights raided every orc clan they could find, that Artak was born. Artak was the son of Turon, his clan's warlord, a title that did not fit the orc well, as he was famous among the clans as a peacemaker. Despite increasing provocations from the local Kaerok Duke, Turon refused to allow any of his warriors to retaliate, instead granting humiliating concessions to the Duke's knights. It earned Turon the nickname Peace Lord, a name which Turon himself laughed off, but which boiled Artak's blood. Then, one day, the Duke approached Peace Lord Turon with an offer. Fight alongside the Duke's forces in a dispute against a neighboring Bannerlord, and the Duke would recognize some of Turon's territorial claims near one of his cities. Artak begged his father to refuse, arguing that the Duke could not be trusted, but his father was blinded by the promise of a permanent home. Artak's instincts were right. The Duke's forces spent the orcs' lives cheaply, sending them to the worst of the fighting and to do the dirtiest deeds. The Duke won his war, but more than half of Turon's warriors were killed. Worst of all, when the king of Kaerok came down on the Duke for fighting in his own realm, the Duke blamed Turon's clan for instigating the fighting. The Duke cast out Turon and his people, breaking his promises and stripping away his land. With his forces depleted, Turon was in no position to resist. Artak was forced to watch his once proud father wither away to a shadow of who he once was, before the Peace Lord finally succumbed to illness, less than a year after the clan was forced to flee. Okay, so Artak's had some lessons in how not to listen to Bannerlords. It was a betrayal that Artak would never forgive. Not long after assuming the title of Warlord, Artak sent messages to every other clan or clan that he knew of, calling for a grand gathering, ostensibly an opportunity for trade and competition, but Artak had a far greater hope in mind. Almost every clan agreed to meet. Such gatherings had been called before, and they were an ancient tradition. While Artak's people enjoyed the games and traded with the other clans, the man himself addressed the other collected warlords. He shouted, interesting, they call him a man instead of an orc, right? So man doesn't mean human here. He shouted the injustices that his father had suffered and the uselessness of appeasement. The Bannerlords would take until the orcs had nothing left at all, as Peace Lord Turin had been forced to learn. Artak claimed there was no bottom to the greed of humans, and so he presented an alternative: war. Bloody vengeance exacted on the entire realm of Kaerok. Not every warlord agreed, but none stood against him, and so he walked away from the gathering with an army of Revenkists. Artak's army fell upon Kaerok like a plague, slaughtering any who dared to oppose them. The orcs cut a bloody swath through the Bannerlords, achieving success after success, and that led to even greater numbers joining them. All Artak's victories, all his righteous anger, only made it more difficult for him to swallow his pride when his son, Kael, dared to push for mercy to be granted to the human. Okay, so now we've got a bit of the backstory. We know why Artak and his clan are coming after the Bannerlords. Seems fairly righteous, right? But you can see how it goes back and forth. It started when the Galen Pact invaded the kingdom of Kaerok, but it didn't really start then because that was revenge for the Red Crusade, and who knows what caused that. But then the Galen Pact lost, and so then they were at, the mercy of the Bannerlords, some of whom weren't very kind to them, and that bred hatred for Bannerlords, and therefore they went, the orcs went back to war with the Bannerlords. So it's a blood feud. It's a blood feud that's gone on for generations, at least 3 generations at this point, because we have Turon, Artak, and Kael. So yeah, and it seems like it's been going on for generations before that because of the Red Crusade and the Galen Pact. Okay. So it's good to get this background. It is kind of interesting to read through the lore along with watching the episodes. I hope that people found this interesting. I want to know what you think. What do you think about the episode? What do you think about the lore? Do you feel like I do, where it's a little bit unoriginal, but hopefully they're doing a good job of setting us up? The animation's pretty good. Let me know what you think. All right, thanks for hanging out. I didn't expect this to be as long as it was. We'll try to do the next episode later today. And like I said, we'll do 2 episodes a day until that 10th episode comes out. I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to meet the other champions, the other starter champions, and hear their stories. And we'll get into that in the next video. All right, thanks for hanging out. I've been Colred. I will see you soon.